There's an old Star Trek Next Generation episode in which the crew of the Enterprise encounters an alien species that they've known about for some time but have never been able to communicate with. At least other people in the Federation haven't, because these people's language can be translated into English words, but the opposing species speaks entirely in words which are arranged into metaphors which the crew of the Enterprise can't understand. This episode is called Darmok, I believe. And I'm looking at several utterances today in terms of this Darmok because of a set of comments I've received in response to my videos. They seem to be done in much the same style, and that they're almost untranslatable. One of them that I've looked at has led me to look at an old couple of quotes again. One of them was Nikita Khrushchev's quote that politicians are the same everywhere. They promise to build a bridge even where there is no river. Bill Clinton took this to perhaps its fantastic extreme, made his own Darmok statement. He said in his 1996 campaign, "We're going to build a bridge to the 21st century that all of you can walk across with your families, with your children, and with your neighbors." Now, what in the world could he have meant by that? If it were literally true, people would have walked across that bridge, seen what the Clintons were like in the 21st century, and maybe never elected him. But certainly there has to be some sort of meaning in there that we simply can't access, at least not in literal terms, and that may have meant something quite different to people who were privy to a different story and a different means of interpreting the words. And I've recently encountered a similar dilemma in my own city, acted out in my own city, and found it by means of trying to figure out the meaning of these comments. One of them was, "Kennen Sie Schicktalner Irrnamensstadt, da gibt's auch einen Chor." I obviously am not pronouncing that anywhere near correct. It was made by Cake Clap Cake in response to my New Highest Note video. And I think it says something along the lines of, in South Africa, there's an insane asylum that has its own choir, implying that I should be joining it. I presume this is supposed to be a positive response. So it includes certain references that I can't trace, but and a geographical reference possibly to South Africa, which I'm unsure of, but it's also written ironically, I assume. So there are many layers of meaning to try to uncover there. But at least it gave me the one clue that these Kenzie comments seem to be written in German. And when they're spliced together with other words, I can post them into translation programs and get a translation for Kens as either identity or knowing. In English, there's a word ken, which means that if in a noun form, if something is within your ken, it's within your area of knowledge or experience, within the boundaries of things you're familiar with. And to ken something is a verb in English meaning to know it. But there's another meaning in that Ken's is also a last name. It can be someone's surname. The first time I encountered this was an earlier comment. Clap Forbust, I don't know why these people use the word clap, said, "Ken's Leander's father, Kenzie yourself?" 2 question marks. So I wrote back asking what that was because I couldn't get a translation. And Clap Forbust replied again, "It means in my language," which he never specified, "that I think that this video is great and you're remembering me to a guy's father, Leander's father." Now, remembering me, I don't think means what he literally said, because remembering someone to someone else means that the other person has not met somebody in a long time isn't going to meet them, but you are soon. So you are soon going to convey a greeting from one person to the other, acting as an intermediary between the two. Now, obviously, I'm not meeting any Kenzie Leander person in the near future, so that couldn't be taken literally. Now, more recently, I've got a couple more of these comments from Kenzie Clapcake, or Cake Clapcake. One of them is Kenzie Iskander, Leander's father, in brackets. That's written in response to my writing prompts from one of my recent meetings. The other one is written in response to the crippled pizza prompt. Kenzie Sabine Shaheen Kenzie Yomada Klampens Fada Klampens Seister brackets ein Zucht. This is almost completely untranslatable, except for the Kens at the beginning, which and fourth word in. The one at the end, ein Zucht, I've tried to type that into translation programs, and the only close fit I could get was inzucht, without an E on the front, which means inbreeding. Again, it's hard to see how this could be taken as a compliment. But with an E on it, perhaps it means one breeding. In other words, it's trying to join all these other things together as if they're related. And here's where the difficulties start. There seems to be a different reference for almost every word. Kenzie could be a word. Shaheen, I've looked up, is a word that is used as a proper name in various places in Western Asia as far as Pakistan. Mada, Fada, and Seister could be mother, father, sister, but they also are all names. Mada is a form of Madeline, a first name. Fada is a last name in Israel and a first name elsewhere. Seister is a last name from England. Now, there's also a possible relationship in the Iskander, that Iskander is a proper name. It's another name for Alexander. It comes from Old Greek, and it's used in places mostly across Central Europe, including Germany and down into the Balkans. Leander is a mythological guy who's famous for swimming the Hellespont, the straits between Europe and Asia, because he had a girlfriend who was a priestess of Aphrodite on the European side, and he swam across the Hellespont to see her because her parents didn't want her to meet him. And of course he eventually drowned in the attempt when the weather got bad one night. So that's one person who had to cross the Hellespont. Now, if you look at Iskander as another way of saying Alexander, and one of the famous people who had the name Alexander is Alexander the Great. He's someone who also crossed the Hellespont to take over the Persian Empire. Shaheen, there's one famous Shaheen reference among many historical personages who expanded a later version of the Persian Empire around 620 AD to its maximum extent and briefly attacked Constantinople with the help of some other people. So he came at the Hellespont from the other side. So we have 3 different Hellespont references in here. But really, what really confuses me is this clampeds words that used twice, and I can't find it anywhere. I've looked in slang dictionaries, even German slang dictionaries. I've typed it into translation programs, and nothing comes up. So I'm left with just trying to interpret it from its resemblance to English words. And I imagine a clam, and it's peds, ped meaning in English a root word for various things that have to do with feet. So a clam actually has a foot. It's the thing that a muscle that extends out of its shell or between its valves and uses to dig into the substrate to anchor itself or to push itself to help transport itself. So, and a clamp, eds having to do with education, I don't know. Clamp has to do with joining 2 things together, as all the words in the sentence seem to do. But all these are written in this strange collection of mostly non-German words, including your, Y-O-U-R, which is an English word. And we have this strange amalgamation, all of these things that require another context to interpret, which is not given. So I eventually tried to learn the meaning of all of what this might be from some local context. So I decided, well, is there something inherently German about pulling in all these languages, all these words from other languages and things that can't be understood and that disguise your own ethnicity? So I thought, well, what German names are there in Calgary? Alberta is, after all, a place settled by, first of all, British people, but secondly, German people. So all people with roots in the Germanic language, English being a Germanic language. Number one ethnic group, according to Wikipedia, in Alberta for origin is English, 24.9%. People now identify as Canadian, 21.8%. But the number two group for a foreign ethnic origin, as identified by the person, is 19.2% German. Scottish follows at 18.8%. Now, Calgary is a place named for a inhabitation on an island called the Isle of Mull off the coast of Scotland. So there are lots and lots of Scottish names in Calgary. They're very visible. But if Calgary is something like 20% Scottish in all of its names, you'd expect German to be as much or more so. So I searched for German names in Calgary. Nothing. It was virtually a blank. The only place that was mentioned as being predominantly German was a place settled by German and Russian immigrants in the first wave of settlement in Calgary in the 1880s, and formerly called Germantown. But it was later renamed to Bridgeland, something which I've alluded to before and which comes up in German culture as well, because people who have a interest in conquering other nations and have a strong militaristic bent seem to express this through an obsession with bridges. There's a famous post-war, anti-war movie from Germany called The Bridge, in which a group of 16-year-old teenagers are assigned the task of guarding a bridge. When Germany is collapsing, there are only 3 more days until the war will be over. But they're given this unimportant bridge to guard, which the local engineers secretly are planning to blow up anyway. And they all lose their lives defending it, or almost all of them, all but one. In Calgary, there's been a very divisive bridge called, ironically, the Peace Bridge. It's actually a war memorial bridge, which was a pedestrian and cyclist bridge built within sight of an existing pedestrian cyclist bridge. So it was pretty much unnecessary in terms of navigation. And very divisive because the voting circumstances are very sketchy as to whether the people really showed up at the right time, whether it should have gone through, and how much was spent on it, and technical difficulties, and the symbolism, and the way it didn't fit in with the landscape, and a bunch of other things like this. So there's this recent controversy and dissatisfaction in Calgary regarding bridge building, which I've alluded to in my sauropod video as well. And I'm wondering, how far back does this go? The first instance of a geographically absurd reference in Calgary regarding bridges that I found has to do with the renaming of Germantown to Bridgeland. At one point there were 2 streets in Calgary named Dresden and Berlin, but they were renamed 2 numbers. And unlike most other ethnic groups you can think of in the city, the German has essentially been wiped out without a trace. And it happened at the time they brought in this new name, and it was for a bridge construction company that didn't have its building near the river where you would build bridges, but partway up the hill where there was nothing in the vicinity that would make you want to build a bridge. But it began this slow wipeout of the name Riverside, a community which is actually, had it been still designated as it once was, in what became the greatest concentration of bridges in the city, but which is slowly being wiped out. There are only a couple of signs left anywhere that say Riverside on them today, and even the local community association is trying to rename the 2 communities just to Bridgeland rather than Bridgeland Riverside. So it seems like there's this relationship between, on the one hand, wiping out one's own ethnic identity, or having it wiped out for you, and wiping out everybody else's. There's this covert war going on, trying to pretend that one ethnicity was never here and didn't exist, which is also undermining the cohesion of the community as a whole. And this is something, of course, that I never would have found if I hadn't seen these strange comments in response to my YouTube videos, apparently made by people of German origin, bringing attention to the loss of identity and the undermining of the civic cohesion of another place where people are largely of German origin. And the funny thing is, people are so conditioned to this that they don't see the loss of identity even in their own communities.